He said I eat but don't help, while chewing steak I bought on a grill I paid for, on land titled in my name. The insult landed between two forkfuls of ribeye like a gavel. The late afternoon sun cut through the live oaks, casting long shadows across the deck I'd built with my own hands 3 summers ago. The air hung thick with cicada songs and barbecue smoke, but all I could hear was that phrase echoing in my skull: "You eat, but don't help." I stood there holding those metal tongs, watching the fat drip and sizzle on the grates of the Weber Genesis I'd assembled in this very spot. The same grill where I'd taught Ethan to flip burgers when he was 12, where my late wife Sarah used to lean against the railing with her sweet tea, laughing at my jokes about perfect grill marks. Now my 34-year-old son sat slouched in one of the patio chairs I'd repaired just last month, his fork cutting through a piece of prime rib that cost me $186.42 at H-E-B. "Dad, seriously," he continued, not even looking up from his plate. "You live here, you eat the food, you use the utilities, but when's the last time you actually contributed anything meaningful?" Mara, my daughter-in-law, didn't even glance up from her phone, just kept scrolling through whatever social media rabbit hole had captured her attention, her manicured nails clicking against the screen. The same nails that had never touched a dish rag, never scrubbed a toilet, never paid a single bill in this house. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. The Ring doorbell camera blinked its little red light from the front porch, dutifully recording this moment for posterity, recording me standing there like some kind of unwanted house guest in the home I'd owned for 23 years. The home where Sarah and I had raised this boy, where we'd planned to grow old together before cancer took her 2 years ago. I thought about the property tax bill I'd paid in January 1984 while they were off in Cabo celebrating Mara's birthday. I thought about the Austin Energy autopay that still hit my checking account every month, the one that kept their air conditioning humming through these brutal Texas summers. The bill that was probably running right now as we sat here in 72-degree comfort. "You know what, Ethan?" I said, setting the tongs down on the side table with more control than I felt. "You're absolutely right." He finally looked up, surprised by my calm tone. Maybe he'd expected me to argue, to defend myself, to list all the ways I'd been helping. The new water heater I'd installed in March, the roof patch I'd coordinated after that hailstorm, the groceries I'd been buying, the repairs I'd been making, the 1,000 quiet ways I'd been contributing to this household. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I walked over to the sliding door and offered to fix the sticking track that had been driving everyone crazy for months. "Nah, don't worry about it," he said, waving me off like I was some door-to-door salesman. "We'll get someone to look at it eventually. Someone, not me. Someone they'd have to pay." I nodded and stepped inside, where the AC I'd been financing hit me like a wall of cool air. On the kitchen counter, crumpled next to the stack of mail, I spotted the latest Austin Energy bill. I smoothed it out and looked at the name in the upper left corner, David Martinez. My name, my bill, my responsibility. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of that bill, making sure the date was clear, May 27th, 2024. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into my wallet, right behind my driver's license. As the sun slid behind the cedar trees that bordered our property, my property, I listened to Ethan and Mara discussing their plans for the weekend. Something about a lake house rental, splitting the cost with friends. They talked about money so casually, as if it grew on trees, as if someone else would always be there to cover the real expenses, the same someone who eats but doesn't help. I excused myself early, claiming fatigue, and walked to my truck. But instead of driving anywhere, I just sat there in the driveway for a while, looking up at the house I'd called home for over 2 decades. The house where I'd carried Sarah over the threshold as a new bride, where we'd brought Ethan home from the hospital, where I'd held her hand during those final months, promising her I'd always take care of our boy. But what happens when taking care of someone means they stop taking care of themselves? What happens when help becomes entitlement, when gratitude turns into expectation? That night, after they'd gone to bed in the master bedroom that used to be mine and Sarah's, I drove to Bank of Texana and opened my safety deposit box. I pulled out the thick manila folder labeled Trust Documents and spread the papers across the small table in that sterile little room. There it was, in Sarah's precise handwriting from when we'd set this up: Revocable Living Trust of David and Sarah Martinez. She'd insisted on that word. Revocable. Life changes, honey, she'd said. We need to be able to adapt. I ran my finger along the clause she'd highlighted in yellow. The trustee reserves the right to sell, transfer, or otherwise dispose of trust property as deemed necessary for the benefit of the trust and its beneficiaries. Sarah always was the smart one. The house hummed with the AC I paid for, but I was the one shivering. May 28th through 31st became a blur of sleepless nights and careful calculations. I'd been relegated to the guest bedroom, the smallest room in the house, after Sarah passed. Just until we figure things out, Ethan had said. That was 2 years ago. The room still smelled faintly of Sarah's cedar sachets and the lavender dryer sheets she'd loved. Her quilt lay folded at the foot of the twin bed. The same quilt her grandmother had stitched by hand in 1943. I spread my receipts across that quilt like I was reading tea leaves, looking for answers in the numbers. HEB grocery receipts going back 12 months, $6,580 total. I'd kept every single one, not out of some obsessive need for control, but because Sarah had always said, track your spending, honey. Money tells stories. The story these receipts told was one of quiet generosity that had gone completely unnoticed. Organic milk at $5.49 a gallon because Mara was trying to be healthier. Prime rib for special occasions that seemed to happen every other weekend. Fresh seafood for their dinner parties, where I was somehow never invited to sit at the table I'd built from reclaimed oak. The utility bills painted an even starker picture. Austin Energy, Austin Water, Spectrum Internet, AT&T Cellular, all in my name, all auto-paying from my checking account. $14,312 over the past 2 years. Not a penny of contribution from the 2 people who used these services daily, who complained when the Wi-Fi was slow or the water pressure dropped. I pulled up Ethan's text messages on my old flip phone. He'd been pushing me toward one of those smartphones, claiming I needed to get with the times, but I liked the simplicity of this device. It kept a record of every conversation, every request, every gradual shift from son to landlord. Let yourself in only if we're home. March 15th, no more random repairs without asking first. April 3rd, Dad, we need boundaries. This is our space now. May 12th, you eat but don't help. May 27th, 6:18 p.m. That last one hit different. Sitting alone in my former guest room that had become my permanent exile. I scrolled back further, looking for the moment when everything changed. When had thank you, Dad, become about time? When had my help become an expectation instead of a gift? I found it in a text from January 31st. Roof guy says we need $9,900 to fix the storm damage. Can you handle it? Not could you help us figure this out? Or what do you think we should do? Just an assumption that I would handle it. That I would always handle it. I had handled it, of course. Transferred the money from my retirement savings the same day. Coordinated with the contractors, supervised the work. The new shingles were still bright against the weathered ones, a testament to my continued investment in their comfort and security. But I was the one who doesn't help. On May 30th, I walked the property line in the dark, my fingers trailing along the cedar fence I'd stained twice since Sarah died. The first time because the Texas sun had bleached it gray. The second time because Mara mentioned it looked shabby compared to the neighbors. I'd spent 3 weekends in brutal August heat, brush in hand, making sure their home looked respectable. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I was now walking the perimeter like a prisoner checking the walls of his cell. This acre and a half had been my dream, Sarah's dream. We'd saved for 15 years to buy it, had watched Ethan take his first steps on the hardwood floors I'd refinished by hand. Now I was the intruder, the burden, the one who needed boundaries. That night, I tried my old key in the guest room door. It turned nothing but air. They'd changed the locks on my own bedroom while I was at the hardware store buying fertilizer for the lawn I maintained. The message was clear. This was their house now, and I was just a tenant who'd overstayed his welcome. I slept in my truck that night, windows cracked to let in the sound of cicadas and the distant hum of I-35 traffic. I thought about Sarah's voice, how she used to say, "Dignity isn't loud." David, real strength whispers. She'd been talking about her cancer treatment then, how she refused to complain even when the pain was unbearable. But the words felt relevant now. Sitting in my Ford F-150 under a canopy of stars, planning my next move. On June 1st, I made an appointment with Ms. Elena Rivas, the trust attorney who'd helped Sarah and me set up our estate planning 5 years ago. I placed my trust binder on her mahogany desk like a man laying down his cards, ready to play the hand I'd been dealt. Justice has a form you can notarize. Elena Rivas hadn't changed much in the 5 years since Sarah and I had sat in her office, planning for a future that cancer would cut short. Same wire-rimmed glasses, same patient smile, same wall of law books that seemed to contain solutions to every human problem if you knew where to look. "David," she said, opening my trust binder with the reverence of a surgeon examining x-rays. "I was so sorry to hear about Sarah. She was a remarkable woman." She was. And she was smart about this trust. Elena read through the documents with the focused intensity I remembered from our original meetings. Sarah had insisted on specific language, specific protections. She'd seen too many family conflicts tear apart inheritances, too many children who confused their parents' generosity with guaranteed income. "You're the sole trustee," Elena confirmed, her finger tracing the relevant paragraphs. "The property is titled in the trust's name, with you having complete authority over its management and disposition. Ethan and Mara are—" She paused, checking another section. "Month-to-month occupants by your grace, not tenants under any formal lease agreement. So I can sell it?" "You can sell it. With proper notice, of course. Texas requires 30 days written notice for month-to-month occupancies." She looked up from the papers. "But David, are you sure this is the path you want to take? Family relationships are difficult to repair once they're broken." I told her about Memorial Day, about 2 years of gradual disrespect, of boundaries that kept shrinking my world smaller and smaller. About $20,000 in expenses I'd covered, while being told I didn't contribute anything meaningful. "I'm not trying to hurt them," I said. "I'm trying to help them understand what real responsibility looks like." Elena nodded slowly. "We'll do this by the book. Document everything. Your contributions, their responses, your attempts at communication. Save all text messages, emails, receipts. If they challenge this later, we want a clear paper trail showing you acted reasonably and lawfully." She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making a list. "First, we need to establish the timeline. When do you want to initiate the sale process?" "Soon, but I want to do this quietly until the notice period." "Understood. I suggest we start with a tenant-occupied sale approach. List the property with full disclosure that it's currently occupied, with the sale contingent on either the occupants vacating after proper notice or the buyer accepting them as short-term tenants with a defined move-out date." I walked straight from Elena's office to Bank of Texana, where Ms. Carmen Delgado had been handling my accounts since Sarah and I opened our first joint checking in 1987. Carmen had congratulated us at our wedding, had processed the loan papers when we bought the house, had held my hand figuratively when I'd had to close Sarah's accounts after she passed. "David," she said, looking up from her computer screen, "how are you holding up?" "I'm ready to make some changes, Carmen. I need account statements showing all the auto-pays for the house, utilities, taxes, insurance, everything. And I'd like to open a separate escrow account for any earnest money deposits." She didn't ask questions, just pulled up my records and started printing. The statements told their own story. Austin Energy, $287 average monthly. Austin Water, $156 average. Spectrum Internet, $18. Property insurance, $3,200 annual. Property taxes, $19,084 annual. A steady stream of money flowing out of my retirement savings to maintain a household where I was treated like an unwelcome guest. How far back do you need these? Carmen asked. 2 years should do it. That evening I called my neighbor Cal Brennan. Cal and I had been friends since he and his wife moved in next door 15 years ago. He'd helped me carry Sarah's hospital bed into the house during her final months, had quietly handled the lawn mowing when I couldn't keep up with everything. He was also one of the most successful real estate agents in Westlake Hills. David, Cal's voice was warm over the phone. How's everything going? I need to ask you a professional question, Cal. Hypothetically, what would my house be worth in today's market? Hypothetically? I could hear the smile in his voice. Well, the Johnsons' place 2 streets over closed last month at $265 million. Similar square footage, but your lot has that greenbelt view. The Patel property on Creek Bend went for $2.9 million, but that was a newer build. I'd estimate yours somewhere in that range, maybe higher with the right buyer. And how quickly could something like that sell? In this market? With your location and condition? Fast. Are we still talking hypothetically? Maybe not. Could we meet tomorrow? Quietly. Of course. My office at 10? On June 3rd, Cal and I shook hands across his desk, my signature still drying on a listing agreement that wouldn't go active for another 3 weeks. We'd planned every detail. Professional photos scheduled for June 12th, when Ethan and Mara would be at work. A pre-inspection on June 10th to avoid any surprises. A curated list of cash buyers who specialized in quick closes and didn't mind tenant-occupied properties. The key, Cal explained, is to present this as a straightforward business transaction. Clean title, well-maintained property, motivated seller, flexible closing terms. The fact that it's occupied just means we price accordingly and set clear expectations. I took photos of every bill that evening, each one with that day's Austin American Statesman folded beside it, June 3rd, 2024, clearly visible in the frame. Elena had been right about documentation. I was building a case, not for court but for history. For the moment when Ethan and Mara would inevitably ask, "How could you do this to us?" The answer would be right there in black and white. I did exactly what they asked me to do. I stopped eating without helping. I started helping in a way they'd finally understand. I started helping the way he'd understand. On paper. The next week moved with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every morning I woke up before dawn, not from insomnia this time, but from purpose. I had a timeline now, a plan that stretched from June 4th through August 5th. Each day had its objectives, its small victories that would add up to one large truth. Respect isn't negotiable. June 4th. I started the documentation phase in earnest. Sarah had kept meticulous records when she was alive. Every receipt, every warranty, every tax document filed in perfect chronological order. I channeled her organizational spirit, creating a ledger that would make an IRS auditor weep with joy. Grocery receipts, 6,480s over 12 months. I didn't just have the total. I had the dates, the stores, even the specific items. Organic produce for Mara's juice cleanses. Expensive cuts of meat for Ethan's grilling experiments. Wine for their dinner parties, where I was expected to cook but not invited to stay. Utility payments, $14,312 over 24 months. Every autopay recorded, every service maintained, every month of their comfort purchased with my retirement savings while they built their own financial future on my foundation. Home maintenance, $23,147 over 2 years. The roof repair after the hailstorm. The HVAC service that kept them cool through record-breaking summers. The plumbing upgrades, the electrical work, the 1,000 small repairs that kept their world functioning seamlessly. But the piece of evidence that carried the most weight was the simplest. That text message from May 27th, 6:18 p.m. You eat but don't help. Screenshot saved, backed up to the cloud, printed and filed in my trust binder. 6 words that would justify everything that followed. On June 8th, Cal and I finalized the listing strategy in his office. The photos were scheduled for June 12th, a Tuesday when both Ethan and Mara would be at their respective offices. I'd volunteer to run errands that morning, giving the photographer clear access to capture the house at its best. "We'll use the standard MLS listing language," Cal explained, pulling up templates on his computer. "Occupied property, showings by appointment only, buyer to honor existing notice periods. Nothing that raises red flags, nothing that suggests family drama. What about the price? I'm thinking 275 million ZAY, high enough to attract serious buyers who can appreciate the quality, competitive enough to generate multiple offers. In this market, I expect we'll see action within the first week." The pre-inspection was scheduled for June 10th. I coordinated it myself, walking through every room with the inspector like a proud homeowner preparing for sale, which of course I was. The inspector found exactly what I expected: a well-maintained property with minor cosmetic issues and one significant charm: that sticking sliding door that Ethan had refused to let me fix. "Nothing major," the inspector told me, checking boxes on his tablet. "UVAC system is recent, roof looks good, electrical is up to code. You might want to address that sliding door before closing, but otherwise, this place is solid." I thanked him and made a note in my phone. "Door fixed by closing, buyer won't inherit our problems." June 11th. I spent the evening creating a timeline that Elena had requested. Every interaction with Ethan and Mara over the past year, every request I'd made to contribute or help, every boundary they'd established that pushed me further toward the margins of my own home. The pattern was clear: gradual exclusion followed by blame for not being included. The morning of June 12th, I left early for what I told them was a doctor's appointment, followed by grocery shopping. Instead, I sat in the Starbucks on Bee Cave Road, watching my phone for updates from the photographer. "Beautiful property," came the text at 11:30 a.m. "Natural light is incredible. These greenbelt views are going to sell themselves." By noon, I had 47 professional photos in my email inbox. The house looked stunning. Sarah would have been proud. Every room staged with the furniture we'd chosen together. Every view captured to highlight the peaceful setting we'd fallen in love with 23 years ago. The photographer had even managed to make that sticking sliding door look charming, like a minor character quirk rather than a maintenance issue. That evening at dinner, Ethan mentioned seeing a car in the driveway that afternoon. "Photography crew," I said, passing the potatoes I'd made from scratch. "Insurance company wanted updated photos for the property valuation. It wasn't entirely a lie. The photos would certainly help establish property value." Mara looked up from her phone for the first time all meal. "Is everything okay with the insurance?" "Everything's fine. Just routine updates every few years." She nodded and returned to her screen. Ethan asked if I could help him move a dresser this weekend, the first request for assistance he'd made in months. I said of course I'd be happy to help, because I would be, right up until the moment I couldn't anymore. On June 13th, Cal texted me the final listing details. "Ready to go live on June 24th. I've already had 3 agents call, asking about pocket listings in your neighborhood. This is going to move fast, David." I saved the message and added it to my documentation file. Everything by the book, everything legal, everything respectful of their rights as month-to-month occupants. Elena had been clear about that. They had rights, and I would honor them completely. But they also had responsibilities, and it was time they learned what those felt like. That night, I helped Ethan move the dresser, and for 30 minutes we worked together like we used to when he was young. He thanked me afterward, and I could see a flicker of the boy who used to hand me tools and ask questions about how things worked. "Dad," he said, as we stood in his bedroom doorway, "I know we haven't always. I mean, things have been tense since Mom died." "I know, son. We're all still figuring out how to do this." He nodded and seemed like he wanted to say more, but Mara called from downstairs about some show they were watching. The moment passed, and he headed for the stairs. I stayed in the doorway for a while, looking at the dresser we'd just moved together. In 2 weeks, I'd be mailing them certified letters. In 6 weeks, we'd be sitting in a closing office. In 8 weeks, they'd be living somewhere else. But for tonight, I was still just Dad, still helping however I could. You can't gaslight a ledger. June 13th through 24th became a masterclass in quiet preparation. Every day I maintained the routine. Morning coffee, newspaper, small talk about their plans, while methodically orchestrating the largest real estate transaction of my life. It felt like living in two realities simultaneously, the surface world, where I was still the helpful father-in-law, and the shadow world, where I was a man taking back his dignity, one document at a time. Cal had been right about the market interest. By June 17th, we had 3 serious inquiries from investors who specialized in quick-close transactions. These weren't house flippers or developers. They were wealthy individuals looking for prime Austin real estate who understood that occupied properties could be excellent opportunities. With the right approach, the Kowalski Group is particularly interested. Cal told me during our coffee meeting at Mozart's on Lake Austin, cash buyers, no financing contingencies, and they're comfortable with the tenant situation. They've done this before with estate sales and family transitions. I like the sound of that. Estate sale. That's exactly what this was, in a way. The estate of my former self. The version of me who had confused generosity with weakness, who had mistaken being needed for being valued. June 17th was also the day we conducted our first showing, while Ethan and Mara were both at work. I took my truck in for an oil change I didn't need, spending 2 hours at Valvoline Instant Oil Change, reading magazines, and giving the buyer's agent clear access to the property. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was paying to maintain Ethan's truck, while he prepared to learn what vehicle payments actually felt like. The inspection report came back June 18th, cleaner than I'd hoped. Property shows excellent maintenance and care, the summary noted. Minor cosmetic updates recommended, but no significant repairs. Required, the sticking sliding door rated barely a mention. Minor. Adjustment needed for smooth operation. Something any competent handyman could address in 30 minutes, which brought me to June 20th, the day that would change everything. I spent the morning at FedEx office, printing and preparing documents with the attention to detail of a surgeon. Elena had provided template language for the 30-day notices, but I'd personalized them slightly, adding context that would make the situation clear without being cruel. Dear Ethan and Mara, the letters began, as month-to-month occupants of the property located at address, you are hereby given 30 days written notice that your occupancy will be terminated on July 20th, 2024. This notice is provided in connection with the pending sale of the property, which requires vacant possession for closing scheduled in early August. Formal, legal, respectful. No mention of Memorial Day barbecues or utility bills or years of accumulated resentment. Just business. I drove to the main post office on Barton Springs Road and sent both notices via certified mail with return receipt requested. The postal clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked if I needed extra insurance. No, ma'am, I said, watching her apply the certified mail stickers. The contents aren't valuable in dollars, but they're priceless in terms of truth. She stamped both envelopes at 10:12 a.m. and handed me the receipts. 2 small pieces of paper that represented the beginning of the end. The listing went active on June 24th at 8 a.m. Cal had timed it perfectly, Monday morning, when serious buyers would be checking new inventory over their coffee. By noon, we had 4 showing requests. By 5 p.m., 2 offers were in preliminary stages. That evening, Ethan asked to borrow my Costco card for a grocery run. We're having people over this weekend, he said. Need to stock up. I handed him the card without hesitation. Of course, get whatever you need. He paused in the doorway, looking at me with something that might have been guilt or gratitude. Thanks, Dad, for everything you do for us. You're welcome, son. But even as I said the words, I knew they carried a different weight now. Soon, very soon, everything I do for you would have clearly defined boundaries. Soon, gratitude wouldn't be optional. It would be necessary for survival. June 25th brought the text I'd been waiting for. Strong cash buyer wants quick close. Will honor notice. Offer tomorrow. I was sitting on the back deck when Cal's message arrived, watching the sun set over the greenbelt that had sold Sarah and me on this property decades ago. The same view that was about to make us both very wealthy and Ethan very independent. I typed back, "Ready when you are." The next morning, as I prepared for what would likely be my last quiet breakfast in this kitchen, I realized I felt no sadness, no regret, just a calm sense of completion, like finishing a long and difficult project exactly the way it was supposed to be done. The offer would arrive within hours. The notices would be delivered by the postal service within days. And somewhere between those two events, my son would learn that "you eat but don't help" was about to become the most expensive sentence he'd ever spoken. But for now, I just poured another cup of coffee and watched the cardinals at Sarah's bird feeder, appreciating the morning quiet before the storm. Silence is loud when a clock is ticking. The offer arrived at 2:47 p.m. on June 27th, delivered by email while I sat in the HEB parking lot, having just spent $213.67 on groceries for people who would soon be buying their own food. I opened the PDF on my phone, squinting at the small screen to read the details that would reshape all our lives. $2.8 million. Cash. $25,000 earnest money. August 5th closing date. The buyer would accept the current occupants through the notice period, with the understanding that vacant possession would be delivered at closing. It was everything Cal had promised and more, a clean, professional offer from people who understood exactly what they were buying. I called Elena from the parking lot. "David, this is an excellent offer," she said, after I'd read her the key terms. "The price is at the top of your market range. The timeline works with your notice requirements, and the earnest money shows serious intent. Do you want to accept? I want to review it tonight and give you an answer tomorrow morning. Take your time. But David, don't overthink this. Sometimes the best deals are the ones that feel right from the beginning." That evening, I spread the offer documents across the kitchen table, while Ethan and Mara watched Netflix in the living room. Their laughter drifted into the kitchen as I read through every clause, every contingency, every detail that would govern our separation. It felt surreal, planning their eviction while listening to them enjoy the entertainment system I'd installed and the internet service I'd been paying for. The morning of June 12th, I left early for what I told them was a doctor's appointment, followed by grocery shopping. Instead, I sat in the Starbucks on Bee Cave Road, watching my phone for updates from the photographer. "Beautiful property," came the text at 11:30 a.m. "Natural light is incredible. These greenbelt views are going to sell themselves." By noon, I had 47 professional photos in my email inbox. The house looked stunning. Sarah would have been proud. Every room staged with the furniture we'd chosen together, every view captured to highlight the peaceful setting we'd fallen in love with 23 years ago. The photographer had even managed to make that sticking sliding door look charming, like a minor character quirk rather than a maintenance issue. That evening at dinner, Ethan mentioned seeing a car in the driveway that afternoon. "Photography crew," I said, passing the potatoes I'd made from scratch. "Insurance company wanted updated photos for the property valuation." It wasn't entirely a lie. The photos would certainly help establish property value. Mara looked up from her phone for the first time all meal. "Is everything okay with the insurance?" "Everything's fine. Just routine updates every few years." She nodded and returned to her screen. Ethan asked if I could help him move a dresser this weekend, the first request for assistance he'd made in months. I said of course I'd be happy to help, because I would be, right up until the moment I couldn't anymore. On June 13th, Cal texted me the final listing details. "Ready to go live on June 24th. I've already had 3 agents call asking about pocket listings in your neighborhood. This is going to move fast, David." I saved the message and added it to my documentation file. Everything by the book, everything legal, everything respectful of their rights as month-to-month occupants. Elena had been clear about that. They had rights, and I would honor them completely. But they also had responsibilities, and it was time they learned what those felt like. That night, I helped Ethan move the dresser, and for 30 minutes we worked together like we used to when he was young. He thanked me afterward, and I could see a flicker of the boy who used to hand me tools and ask questions about how things worked. "Dad," he said as we stood in his bedroom doorway, "I know we haven't always. I mean, things have been tense since Mom died. I know, son. We're all still figuring out how to do this." He nodded and seemed like he wanted to say more, but Mara called from downstairs about some show they were watching. The moment passed, and he headed for the stairs. I stayed in the doorway for a while, looking at the dresser we'd just moved together. In 2 weeks, I'd be mailing them certified letters. In 6 weeks, we'd be sitting in a closing office. In 8 weeks, they'd be living somewhere else. But for tonight, I was still just Dad, still helping however I could. You can't gaslight a ledger. June 13th through 24th became a masterclass in quiet preparation. Every day, I maintained the routine, morning coffee, newspaper, small talk about their plans, while methodically orchestrating the largest real estate transaction of my life. It felt like living in 2 realities simultaneously, the surface world, where I was still the helpful father-in-law, and the shadow world, where I was a man taking back his dignity 1 document at a time. Cal had been right about the market interest. By June 17th, we had 3 serious inquiries from investors who specialized in quick-close transactions. These weren't house flippers or developers. They were wealthy individuals looking for prime Austin real estate who understood that occupied properties could be excellent opportunities. With the right approach, the Kowalski Group is particularly interested. Cal told me during our coffee meeting at Mozart's on Lake Austin. Cash buyers, no financing contingencies, and they're comfortable with the tenant situation. They've done this before with estate sales and family transitions. I like the sound of that. Estate sale. That's exactly what this was in a way. The estate of my former self, the version of me who had confused generosity with weakness, who had mistaken being needed for being valued. June 17th was also the day we conducted our first showing, while Ethan and Mara were both at work. I took my truck in for an oil change I didn't need, spending 2 hours at Valvoline Instant Oil Change, reading magazines and giving the buyer's agent clear access to the property. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was paying to maintain Ethan's truck while he prepared to learn what vehicle payments actually felt like. The inspection report came back June 18th, cleaner than I'd hoped. Property shows excellent maintenance and care, the summary noted. Minor cosmetic updates recommended but no significant repairs. Required. The sticking sliding door rated barely a mention. Minor. Adjustment needed for smooth operation. Something any competent handyman could address in 30 minutes. Which brought me to June 20th, the day that would change everything. I spent the morning at FedEx office, printing and preparing documents with the attention to detail of a surgeon. Elena had provided template language for the 30-day notices, but I'd personalized them slightly, adding context that would make the situation clear without being cruel. Dear Ethan and Mara, the letters began. As month-to-month occupants of the property located at address, you are hereby given 30 days written notice that your occupancy will be terminated on July 20th, 2024. This notice is provided in connection with the pending sale of the property, which requires vacant possession for closing scheduled in early August. Formal, legal, respectful. No mention of Memorial Day barbecues or utility bills or years of accumulated resentment. Just business. I drove to the main post office on Barton Springs Road and sent both notices via certified mail with return receipt requested. The postal clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked if I needed extra insurance. No, ma'am, I said, watching her apply the certified mail stickers. The contents aren't valuable in dollars, but they're priceless in terms of truth. She stamped both envelopes at 10:12 a.m. and handed me the receipts. Two small pieces of paper that represented the beginning of the end. The listing went active on June 24th at 8 a.m. Cal had timed it perfectly. Monday morning, when serious buyers would be checking new inventory over their coffee. By noon, we had 4 showing requests. By 5:30 p.m., 2 offers were in preliminary stages. That evening, Ethan asked to borrow my Costco card for a grocery run. "We're having people over this weekend," he said. "Need to stock up." I handed him the card without hesitation. "Of course. Get whatever you need." He paused in the doorway, looking at me with something that might have been guilt or gratitude. "Thanks, Dad, for everything you do for us." "You're welcome, son." But even as I said the words, I knew they carried a different weight now. Soon, very soon, everything I do for you would have clearly defined boundaries. Soon, gratitude wouldn't be optional. It would be necessary for survival. June 25th brought the text I'd been waiting for. "Strong cash buyer wants quick close. Will honor notice. Offer tomorrow." I was sitting on the back deck when Cal's message arrived, watching the sun set over the green belt that had sold Sarah and me on this property decades ago. The same view that was about to make us both very wealthy and Ethan very independent. I typed back, "Ready when you are." The next morning, as I prepared for what would likely be my last quiet breakfast in this kitchen, I realized I felt no sadness, no regret, just a calm sense of completion, like finishing a long and difficult project exactly the way it was supposed to be done. Mara wandered into the kitchen around 9 p.m., looking for her phone charger. "Working late?" she asked, glancing at the papers spread across the table. "Just reviewing some financial documents." Planning ahead, she nodded absently and plugged her phone into the charger I'd bought and installed in the kitchen island. "That's smart." "Ethan and I have been talking about getting more serious about budgeting too. Maybe we should all sit down together sometime and compare notes." I looked up at her. This young woman who'd lived in my house for 3 years without contributing a single dollar to its upkeep, who was now talking about budgeting while her phone charged on my electricity. That's a great idea. Mara, we should definitely do that soon. Very soon, in fact. Within 30 days, she'd have all the budgeting practice she could handle. June 28th, I signed the offer acceptance at Elena's office. Her notary stamp came down on the signature page with the finality of a judge's gavel. $25,000 earnest money would be deposited by end of business. The inspection period would run through July 9th. Closing was set for August 5th at 10 a.m. "How are you feeling?" Elena asked as she gathered the signed documents. "Like, I'm about to find out who my son really is." The earnest money. Receipt arrived in my email at 4:23 p.m. Bank of Texana had received the wire transfer and deposited it into the escrow account Carmen had set up. $25,000 sitting in an account with my name on it, representing more money than Ethan and Mara had ever contributed to household expenses in their entire time living with me. That night at dinner, Ethan seemed different, restless. He kept checking his phone and looking toward the front windows as if expecting someone. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just, have you noticed more cars on our street lately? Feels like there's been more traffic." I hadn't noticed because I'd been orchestrating it. Showing appointments, inspection visits, buyer drive-bys. Our quiet cul-de-sac had indeed seen more activity in the past week. "Probably just summer," I said. "People driving around looking at neighborhoods. Maybe." He put his phone down and actually looked at me across the table. "Dad, I've been thinking about what I said on Memorial Day. I was having a bad day and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. This was the conversation I'd imagined having. The apology that might have changed everything if it had come 3 weeks earlier. But the earnest money was already deposited, the notices were already in the mail, and the timeline was already set in motion. I appreciate that, son. I mean it. You do help. Maybe not in ways that are always obvious, but you do help. Mara looked up from her plate, seeming to sense the gravity of the moment. "We both appreciate you, David. I hope you know that." I set my fork down and looked at these two people who were about to learn the difference between appreciation and action, between saying thank you and meaning it. I know you do, and I want you to know that everything I've done because I love you both. We love you too, Dad. The certified mail receipts were waiting in my mailbox the next morning. Both letters delivered and signed for on June 29th. Ethan's signature at 10:23 a.m., Mara's at 2:15 p.m. By now, they would have read the notices. By now, they would understand that their father hadn't just accepted their definition of help. He'd redefined it entirely. I folded the receipts and placed them in my trust binder, next to Sarah's photo and the property deed. Everything documented, everything legal, everything irreversible. The inspection was scheduled for July the 1st. The appraisal would follow on July 2nd. The buyer's financing was cash, so no loan contingencies to worry about. The timeline was tight but manageable, assuming everyone behaved like adults, assuming a lot of things that might not be safe to assume anymore. On June 30th, I treated myself to lunch at Threadgill's, sitting alone at a corner table and eating chicken fried steak while reviewing my phone for any messages from Ethan or Mara. Nothing yet. Maybe they hadn't read the notices carefully. Maybe they thought it was some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. Or maybe they were planning their response very carefully. Either way, I was ready. The earnest money was deposited, the contracts were signed, and the law was on my side. I'd learned something important over the past month. When you stop asking for respect and start requiring it, people suddenly pay very close attention to your words. Tomorrow, the inspection. Tomorrow, they'd have to face the reality that their free ride was ending, and their real education was about to begin. I paid my check with cash and drove home to a house that wouldn't be home much longer, ready for whatever came next. The closing room smelled like dry coffee and victory. July the 2nd, 10 a.m. sharp. First American Title Company, their downtown office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lady Bird Lake. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, carrying my trust binder and wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to Sarah's funeral. This felt like another ending, another beginning. Another moment that would divide my life into before and after. Cal was already there, reviewing documents with the efficiency of a man who'd closed hundreds of deals. Elena sat beside him, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the final contract terms. The buyer's agent, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, had spread her own paperwork across the polished conference table like a general planning a campaign. "David," Jennifer said as I took my seat, "I want you to know my clients are thrilled with this property. The inspection yesterday went smoothly, just minor items that won't affect the sale. I'm glad to hear that. The notary, a quiet man named Robert, was organizing his stamps and seals with military precision. Everything felt choreographed, professional, inevitable. This was happening. After 31 days of planning, documentation, and careful execution, I was about to sell the house my son thought he lived in for free. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Dad, can you pick up propane for the grill? We're having people over tonight." I slid the phone face down on the table and focused on Elena as she began reading through the settlement statement. Every line item was accounted for. Purchase price, $2,800,000. Earnest money credit, $25,000. Real estate commission, $84,000. Title insurance, $3,200. Various fees and adjustments that would leave me with $2,742,800. After all costs, more money than I'd ever imagined. When Sarah and I bought this house for $127,000 in 2001, the buyer would like to confirm the occupancy situation, Jennifer said, checking her notes. "You provided proper 30-day notice to the current occupants." Elena opened my documentation file. Notice was served via certified mail on June 20th, received by both occupants on June 29th. The 30-day period expires July 29th, well before the August 5th closing date. And they understand they need to vacate? I thought about Ethan's text asking for propane about their plans to have people over tonight, about how completely they seem to have misunderstood what those certified letters meant. They've been properly notified according to Texas law. Elena answered diplomatically. The buyer's option period had ended July 9th, with no requests for repairs beyond that sticking sliding door, which I'd already arranged to have fixed. The appraisal had come in at $2.85 million, validating our asking price and confirming what Cal had suspected. This property was worth every penny we were asking. "Mr. Martinez," Robert the notary said, "I'll need to see your driver's license and have you initial each page of the contract." I pulled out my wallet, the same leather wallet that held the photo of that first Austin Energy bill from Memorial Day. As I handed over my license, I thought about how much had changed in just over a month, how a single sentence, "You eat but don't help," had triggered this cascade of legal documents and financial transactions. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Ethan. "Also, Mara's parents are coming to visit next weekend. Can you maybe stay at Uncle Rick's for a few days?" I initialed the first page of the contract and moved to the second. Uncle Rick lived in Dallas. They wanted me to drive 3 hours and impose on my brother-in-law, so their house guests wouldn't have to deal with the inconvenience of my presence in my own home that I was currently selling out from under them. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me laugh. "Everything okay, David?" Cal asked, noticing my smile. "Everything's exactly as it should be." Page by page, I initialed my way through the contract. Purchase terms, financing conditions, property disclosures, closing instructions. Each signature felt like a small victory, each initial like another step toward freedom. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. This wasn't cruelty, it was consequences. At 10:47 a.m., the final earnest money wire hit the escrow account. At 10:53 a.m., Jennifer slid the executed contract across the table with a satisfied smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Martinez, you have a sale." I shook hands with everyone around the table, accepting their congratulations and best wishes. Outside the conference room windows, downtown Austin buzzed with its usual energy. Food trucks serving lunch to office workers, joggers following the trail along Lady Bird Lake. Life continuing as normal while my life transformed completely. What's next? I asked Elena as we gathered our papers. Now we wait. The buyer will order their title work, arrange their final walkthrough, and prepare for closing. Your job is to ensure the property is vacant and ready for transfer by August 5th. My job was to break the news to Ethan and Mara that their 30-day notice wasn't a suggestion or a negotiating position. It was a legal requirement that would be enforced whether they understood it or not. I drove home thinking about Toby the locksmith, who I had already scheduled for July 10th. New locks, new keys, new boundaries. The same boundaries I should have established 2 years ago when grief made me confuse enabling with helping. As I pulled into the driveway, my driveway, for 23 more days, I typed a response to Ethan's texts. "We need to talk when you get home. All 3 of us. It's important." Then I walked into the house and began planning the most difficult conversation of my life. The conversation where a father would finally teach his son the difference between help and handouts, between gratitude and entitlement, between living somewhere and earning the right to stay. The conversation that would determine whether this family could heal or whether some relationships were too broken to repair. Either way, the closing was scheduled for August 5th at 10 a.m. The money was committed. The contracts were signed, and the law was on my side. For the first time in 2 years, I held all the cards. The first thunder wasn't in the sky. It was in the group chat, July 3rd, 6:30 p.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table when they came home from work, both of them carrying themselves differently than they had that morning. Ethan's usual casual confidence had been replaced by something harder, more defensive. Mara wouldn't make eye contact as she set her purse on the counter and immediately reached for her phone. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "we need to talk." "Yes, we do." I taped both certified letters to the refrigerator that afternoon, right at eye level, where they couldn't be missed or ignored. Not hidden, not presented as a surprise, just posted like any other important household notice. Which, legally speaking, they were. You can't just sell this house, Ethan continued, pulling one of the letters down and waving it like evidence of my betrayal. This is our home. It's my house, son. It always has been. I opened the trust binder to the property deed and turned it so they could both see Sarah's and my names clearly printed as the original grantees. The trust documents showing me as sole trustee. The estate planning paperwork that gave me complete authority over this property and every decision related to it. Elena had coached me on this moment. Stay calm, stick to facts, let the documents speak for themselves. But we live here, Mara said, finally looking up from her phone. We've made this our home for 3 years. You've lived here as month-to-month occupants, which means either party can terminate that arrangement with proper notice. Which I've provided. Ethan sat down hard in one of the kitchen chairs, the same chair where he'd told me I eat but don't help 37 days ago. This is insane. You can't just kick us out because you're having some kind of midlife crisis. I reached for my documentation folder and pulled out the grocery receipts, the utility bills, the repair invoices. 2 years' worth of evidence that told a story he apparently didn't want to hear. $6,480 in groceries over the past year, I said, spreading the receipts across the table. $14,312 in utilities over the past 2 years. $9,900 for roof repairs after the hailstorm. Property taxes, homeowners insurance, maintenance, upkeep, all paid by me while you told me I don't contribute anything meaningful. We never asked you to pay for all that stuff. Mara protested. You never offered to pay for any of it either. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning unit I'd replaced the year before. Outside, fireworks were already starting to pop in preparation for the 4th of July, premature celebrations that felt oddly appropriate for this premature ending. So what, this is punishment? Ethan asked. You're punishing us for hurting your feelings? I'm teaching you what independence actually costs. I pulled out my phone and called Elena. Putting it on speaker as I'd arranged earlier, Elena, it's David. I'm here with Ethan and Mara, and they have questions about the 30-day notice. Elena's calm, professional voice filled the kitchen. Good evening, Ethan and Mara. I'm Elena Rivas, the attorney who handled your parents' estate planning. David has every legal right to sell this property with proper notice to month-to-month occupants, which he's provided. Texas law requires 30 days written notice, which was served on June 20th and received by both of you on June 29th. But this is crazy, Mara said toward the phone. He can't just throw us out on the street. He's not throwing you out. He's giving you 30 days to find alternative housing, which is exactly what the law requires. I understand this is difficult, but everything is being done properly and legally. After Elena hung up, the kitchen felt heavier somehow. Ethan stared at the spread of receipts and documents, maybe seeing them clearly for the first time. Mara had tears in her eyes, though I suspected they were more about inconvenience than genuine sadness. Where are we supposed to go? She asked. Anywhere you can afford, I said gently. There are plenty of rental properties in Austin within your budget range. You don't understand, Ethan said. We can't afford Austin rent prices. We've been saving money by living here. I understand perfectly. You've been saving money by spending mine. July 4th passed in tense silence. They stayed in their room most of the day, while I grilled hamburgers for one and watched fireworks from the deck alone. Neighbors stopped by throughout the evening. Cal and his wife, the Hendersons from across the street, others who'd become friends over the years. I found myself saying goodbye without actually saying the words, knowing this would be my last 4th of July in this house. On July 9th, the buyer's option period expired with no repair requests beyond the sliding door. I called Toby the locksmith that afternoon. Hey, David, it's time for those new locks? It's time, July 10th, 9 a.m. Toby arrived with his toolkit and began the methodical process of rekeying every exterior lock on the property. Elena had been specific about this, as month-to-month occupants, Ethan and Mara, were entitled to access during their notice period. But I had the right to control that access as the property owner. "I'll give them one key each," I told Toby as he worked on the front door deadbolt. "The master key goes in my bank safety deposit box." "Understood." "What about the garage door opener?" "They can keep the remotes until they move. After that, I'll change the code." Ethan and Mara watched this process from the kitchen window, their faces registering the reality that their father had moved from threat to action. The locks that had kept me out of my own guest bedroom were now being replaced by locks I controlled completely. When Toby finished, I handed them each a new key in a labeled envelope. "These are good through July 29th, I said. "After that, the new owners will be taking possession." "Dad," Ethan said quietly, "please don't do this. We can work something out. We can start paying rent, help with utilities, whatever you want." For just a moment, I wavered. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball. The young man I'd walked across the stage at his college graduation. Part of me wanted to tear up the sale contract and find a way back to the family we used to be. But then I remembered Memorial Day. I remembered 2 years of gradual exclusion, of being made to feel like a burden in my own home, of watching my generosity transform into entitlement. "The house is sold, son. Closing is August 5th. This conversation should have happened on May 27th, not July 10th. That evening, Mara's group chat started buzzing with activity. I could hear her on the phone in their bedroom, her voice rising and falling as she explained their situation to friends and family. By bedtime, my phone had 3 missed calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, all suddenly concerned about family dynamics they'd ignored for years. I didn't return the calls. There was nothing left to discuss. The contracts were signed, the earnest money was deposited, and the calendar was running down to August 5th, whether they accepted it or not. 26 days until closing. 26 days until they learned what "you eat but don't help" actually costs in the real world. Justice isn't a shout. It's a wire confirmation. July 13th through August 5th, blurred together like time-lapse photography. 23 days that felt simultaneously endless and instant, each one bringing us closer to the inevitable conclusion of this strange chapter in our family's story. They fought me every step of the way, but it was the kind of fighting that proved they'd never understood the battle they were in. Ethan posted on social media about ungrateful parents who don't understand sacrifice. Mara started a GoFundMe page titled "Family Emergency, Facing Unexpected Homelessness." They reached out to relatives, church members, anyone who might pressure me to reconsider. I posted nothing, said nothing, just continued the daily routine of managing a property sale while living with people who were actively trying to sabotage it. Cal walked me through the closing disclosure on July 15th. Every line item accounted for with the precision of a NASA-launched checklist. After real estate commissions, title fees, transfer taxes, and various closing costs, the net proceeds would be $2,742,800. More money than Sarah and I had ever dreamed of when we bought this house 23 years ago. "How does it feel?" Cal asked as we reviewed the final numbers. Like breathing after holding your breath for 2 years, I helped them search for rental properties, printing listings that fit their actual budget and leaving them on the kitchen counter like peace offerings. They crumpled them up and threw them away, as if refusing to acknowledge the options would somehow change the mathematics of their situation. On July 20th, their official move-out deadline passed without action. Elena had prepared an eviction notice, but the sale contract allowed occupancy through August 5th if necessary. The buyers understood they might need to take possession with a day or 2 of overlap while final move-out occurred. "Are you sure about this, David?" Elena asked during one of our final consultations. "There's still time to reverse course if you want to try mediation or family counseling, I'm sure." They've had 44 days to demonstrate that they understand the problem. Instead, they've spent 44 days trying to convince everyone else that I'm the problem. August 2nd brought the final buyer walkthrough. Jennifer Walsh and her clients toured every room, while Ethan and Mara sat in the living room like hostile witnesses at their own trial. The buyers were gracious, professional, understanding about the awkward circumstances. Beautiful property, the husband told me as we stood on the deck overlooking the greenbelt. We can see why you've loved living here. It's been a good home. I hope it will be for you too. That evening, Ethan tried one last approach. He found me in the garage, organizing tools I'd accumulated over 2 decades of home ownership. Dad, I need you to know something. When I said you eat but don't help, I was wrong. I was angry about work, stressed about money, and I took it out on you. I'm sorry. I set down the wrench I'd been holding and really looked at my son. He was 34 years old, but in that moment, he looked like the scared little boy who used to crawl into bed with Sarah and me during thunderstorms. I accept your apology, Ethan, but apologies don't change consequences. They just make the consequences more educational. You'll regret this, he said, his brief vulnerability hardening back into anger. When you're sitting alone in some apartment, you'll regret throwing away your family for money. I thought about Sarah's voice, the way she used to remind me that boundaries were love with a spine. That sometimes the most loving thing you could do was let people experience the natural results of their choices. Maybe I will regret it, but you'll learn from it, and maybe that's more important than my comfort. August 5th, 9:30 a.m., the same closing room where I'd signed the sale contract, but this time filled with different energy. Final energy, completion energy. The wire instructions were prepared, the deed was ready for transfer, and the keys to my former life were arranged neatly on the conference table. Carmen from Bank of Texana was there to witness the wire transfer, her familiar smile providing comfort in this surreal moment. Elena had brought a final folder of documents, copies of everything for my records, proof of this methodical conclusion to a 2-year lesson in respect. Mr. Martinez, Robert the notary said, this is the warranty deed transferring the property to the buyers. Your signature here makes it official. I sign my name with the same steady hand that had signed Sarah's DNR papers, that had signed Ethan's college loan documents, that had signed thousands of checks to keep this family afloat. But this signature felt different. This signature set me free. At 10:06 a.m., the wire confirmation printed $2,748 deposited into my Bank of Texana account. Jennifer handed me a copy with a smile. Congratulations, David. How does it feel to be a millionaire? It feels like justice. I shook hands with the buyers, wished them happiness in their new home, and walked out of that conference room into a completely different life. No sheriffs, no drama, no family screaming match. Just a legal transaction between adults who understood the value of property and the cost of respect. I drove straight to my new apartment near Zilka Park, a 1-bedroom place I'd leased quietly 3 weeks earlier. Small but comfortable, with a view of the greenbelt and monthly rent I could afford from investment returns alone. A place where every key fit, every bill had my name on it, and every decision was mine to make. That afternoon, I unpacked my toolbox first, hung Sarah's quilt, made coffee in a kitchen that would never run out of anything I didn't put there myself. For the first time in 2 years, I cooked dinner for exactly 1 person and felt completely satisfied with the portions. The silence was golden. I walked through a door that finally locked from the inside, my inside. August 6th through 8th, 3 days that felt like emerging from underwater, like waking up from a dream, where I'd forgotten who I was and remembered just in time. My new apartment smelled like fresh paint and possibility, every corner free from the accumulated resentment that had poisoned the air in my former home. I spread my final ledger across the small dining table, adding up not just the money, but the mathematics of respect. $14,312 in utilities over 2 years, $6,480 in groceries over 1 year, $9,900 for roof repairs I'd funded from retirement savings, $2,740 to the $800 from the sale, numbers that told a story about the difference between being used and being useful. The earnest money, 25,000, had become just one line item in a larger lesson about what happens when gratitude becomes optional and boundaries become necessary. I wrote Ethan a letter that night, sitting at my new kitchen table with Sarah's fountain pen. Not the angry letter I might have written in May, not the vindictive letter that June might have produced, but the measured words of a father who'd finally remembered how to be a man. "Son," I began, "I want you to understand why I did what I did. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I loved you enough to let you learn what independence actually costs. For 2 years, I watched you confuse my generosity with weakness, my help with obligation. I enabled that confusion by never requiring gratitude, never establishing boundaries, never insisting on mutual respect. I enclosed a check for 3 months' rent assistance, not as a gift, but as a bridge to self-sufficiency. I also included a budget worksheet that Carmen at the bank had helped me prepare, showing realistic Austin rent prices, utility costs, and household expenses for 2 working adults. This isn't punishment, I continued in the letter. This is education. You'll learn to budget utilities because you'll pay them yourself. You'll appreciate grocery money because it will come from your own paychecks. You'll value maintenance and repairs because you'll either do them yourself or hire people with your own funds. I ended the letter with the most important thing I'd learned through this entire process. If you want help in the future, ask like a man, not like a child. Ask with a plan, not with an assumption. Ask with gratitude, not with entitlement. The door is always open for that conversation. I sealed the letter in a certified mail envelope, the same method I'd used for the 30-day notices. Paper that tells the truth without raising its voice. August 8th. I drove to the post office and sent the letter to their new address on Menchaca Road, a 2-bedroom apartment they'd found at the last minute, 40 minutes from downtown, with rent that would consume most of their combined income. The kind of place young couples live when they're building something together instead of living off someone else's foundation. That evening, I called my brother Rick in Dallas. "David, how are you holding up? Ethan called me last week pretty upset about the house situation. I'm holding up fine. Rick, better than fine, actually. He made it sound like you'd lost your mind, selling the house out from under them. Maybe I found my mind instead of losing it." I told Rick the whole story from Memorial Day through the closing. He listened without interrupting, the way Sarah used to listen when I needed to work through a problem out loud. Jesus, David. I had no idea things had gotten that bad. They didn't get bad overnight. They got bad one small compromise at a time, one boundary violation after another, until I woke up one day and realized I'd become a tenant in my own life. Do you think they'll come around? Understand what you were trying to teach them? I looked out my apartment window at the Zilker Greenbelt, where families were setting up for evening picnics and couples were walking dogs. Normal people living normal lives with normal boundaries and mutual respect. I hope so, Rick. But even if they don't, I'll be okay. For the first time in 2 years, I'll be okay. August 9th, I took Sarah's photo out of my truss binder and set it on the mantel of my new home. She was smiling in that picture, the way she smiled when she was proud of me for doing something difficult but necessary. "We did it, honey," I said to that photo. "We taught him what you always said boundaries were, love with a spine." That night I slept 10 hours straight, the deepest sleep I'd had since Sarah died. No footsteps overhead, no conversations I wasn't invited to join, no utility bills auto-paying from my account for services I couldn't control. Just peace. Finally, blessed peace. The apology didn't come in words, it came in receipts, August 15th. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. After 10 days of silence, I expected anger or another attempt at guilt manipulation. Instead, I got a photo of a lease agreement with their signatures at the bottom and the first month's rent receipt stapled to the corner. "First month paid on time," the text read. "Mara and I did it together." I stared at that image for a long time. It was such a small thing, paying rent like millions of adults do every month, but for them, it represented something revolutionary. The first time in their adult lives, they'd been fully responsible for their own shelter. I texted back, "Proud of you." August 18th brought another photo. Mara, standing next to a dining room set they'd bought at a thrift store and refinished themselves. The table was scratched oak, the chairs mismatched but painted a cheerful yellow. It looked like something young people would own, something they were building together instead of inheriting. "Found this at Estate Sales Plus," Mara's text explained. "Spent the weekend sanding and painting. Feels good to make something ours." I forwarded the photo to Rick with a note. Progress. August 22nd, Ethan asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. Not at the house. Their house was 40 minutes away and I wasn't invited anyway. At Magnolia Cafe on Lake Austin, neutral territory where we could sit across from each other like adults instead of landlord and tenant. He looked different when he walked in. Thinner maybe, but more solid somehow. Like he was carrying himself instead of being carried. "Dad," he said, sliding into the booth across from me, "I brought something to show you." He pulled out a spiral notebook, the kind college students use for class notes. Inside were pages of careful handwriting, budget categories, expense tracking, monthly planning sheets. Rent, utilities, groceries, transportation, savings, all mapped out in his precise engineer's script. "Mara and I are learning to budget," he said. "Turns out we never really knew what things cost when someone else was paying for them." I flipped through the pages, seeing grocery totals that matched my old receipts, utility estimates that aligned with the bills I'd been paying, rent calculations that consumed 40% of their combined income. "This is good work, son. It's hard work. I never realized how much you were spending to keep us comfortable. I mean, I knew you paid for stuff, but I never added it all up. We ordered pancakes and talked like we hadn't in years. About his job at the engineering firm, about Mara's work at the non-profit, about their plans to save for a house down payment over the next 5 years. Real plans based on real numbers instead of assumptions about other people's money. "I owe you an apology," he said as we finished our coffee. "Not just for what I said on Memorial Day, but for everything that led up to it. For taking your help for granted, for treating your house like it was mine, for acting like you were the problem when we were the ones living off your generosity." Apology accepted. "And I owe you something else." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded check. "This is partial payment for utilities from the past year. I calculated what our share should have been, and this covers about half of it. We'll send you more each month until we're caught up." I looked at the check, $300. Not a huge amount, but it represented something much larger than money. It represented acknowledgement, responsibility, and the first step toward a relationship based on mutual respect instead of one-sided obligation. "You don't have to do this, Ethan." "Yes, I do. Not because you're making me, but because it's right." August 28th, Mara sent me a photo of their utility bill with "paid in full" stamped across it in red ink. The amount was $267.43. Austin Energy, Austin Water, Spectrum Internet. Their names on the account, their money covering the costs, their signature on the check. "First time ever paying our own utilities," she texted. "Feels like being a real adult." I showed the photo to Carmen at the bank when I stopped by to review my investment portfolio. The sale proceeds were earning steady returns, more than enough to cover my modest living expenses and occasional travel I was planning. "Your son's learning," Carmen observed. "They both are. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones that stick the best." September 1st, Ethan and Mara invited me to dinner at their apartment. Not to cook for them, not to fix something that was broken, but to share a meal they'd prepared in their own kitchen, with their own groceries, purchased with their own money. The apartment was small but welcoming. The thrift store dining set looked perfect in their space. Surrounded by furniture they were acquiring piece by piece as their budget allowed. Mara had planted herbs in coffee cans on the windowsill. Ethan had built shelves from reclaimed wood. It felt like home in a way my old house hadn't for a very long time. Dad, Ethan said as we cleared the dishes together. Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. For caring enough to let me fail. For teaching me that help and handouts are two different things. As I drove back to my apartment that night, I realized something had shifted. For 2 years after Sarah's death, I'd been trying to keep our family together by holding it up myself. Now finally we were building something new, not held up by one person's sacrifice, but supported by everyone's contribution. It was smaller than what we'd had before, but it was stronger. And that made all the difference. The house that ate without helping is now feeding my retirement. September 1st. I sat at my new kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the Austin American Statesman spread out before me. The real estate section showed my old house listed under recently sold, with a photo of the Greenbelt view that had first captured Sarah's heart 23 years ago. $2.8 million, the listing price that had once seemed impossible for a house we'd bought for $127,000. But the real story wasn't in the real estate section. It was in my bank statements, my investment portfolio, my monthly budget that now, balanced without the constant drain of supporting 2 additional adults who'd confused my generosity. With their birthright, I'd used a portion of the sale proceeds to establish something Sarah would have loved. The Sarah Martinez Memorial Scholarship for Single Mothers pursuing nursing degrees at Austin Community College. $50,000 endowment that would help women who understood the value of education, hard work, and self-reliance. Women who wouldn't confuse assistance with entitlement. The remainder was invested conservatively, generating enough monthly income to cover my modest living expenses, plus travel I'd been dreaming about since Sarah got sick. Scotland, where her grandmother had been born. Ireland, where we'd honeymooned but never returned. Places where I could walk ancient paths and remember what it felt like to be David Martinez instead of just someone's father, someone's source of free rent and groceries. Cal texted me a photo that afternoon. The old house with fresh paint, kids' chalk drawings on the driveway, a swing set in the backyard where Sarah's garden used to be. The new owners were building a life there, not just occupying space someone else maintained. Looks happy, his text read. It did look happy, and for the first time since Sarah died, so did I. September 15th. Ethan called with news that felt like vindication. He'd gotten a promotion at work, partly because his newfound attention to budgets and detailed planning had impressed his supervisors. Learning to manage his own household finances had made him a better engineer. Turns out all that obsessive tracking you taught me as a kid was actually useful, he said. Who knew? Your mother knew. She always said the details matter. Dad, can I ask you something? Do you miss the house? I looked around my apartment, at Sarah's quilt draped over the couch, at her photo on the mantel, at the tools organized neatly in my closet, because I finally had space for everything I owned. I miss the house Sarah and I built together. I don't miss the house where I became invisible. I'm sorry we made you feel invisible. You didn't make me feel anything, son. I chose to feel invisible because I thought keeping peace was more important than keeping respect. I was wrong about that. October 3rd, 3 months after the closing, I decided to record this story, not for revenge or vindication, but for the thousands of parents who might be reading their own obituaries in their children's entitlement. Who might be wondering when help became obligation, when gratitude became optional, when boundaries became cruelty. I set up my phone on the kitchen table, opened the window to let in the sound of cicadas, and started talking. He said, I eat but don't help while chewing steak I bought on a grill I paid for, on land titled in my name. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from, because if you're listening to this story, chances are you recognize yourself in it somewhere. Maybe you're the parent who's been confusing generosity with weakness. Maybe you're the adult child who's been confusing help with entitlement. Maybe you're somewhere in between, trying to find the balance between love and boundaries. Here's what I learned. Boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're foundations meant to keep relationships strong. When you remove consequences from choices, you remove the education from experience. When you provide everything someone needs without requiring anything they can give, you rob them of the satisfaction of earning their own way. My son learned to budget not because I taught him spreadsheet formulas, but because Austin Energy started sending him bills. He learned to value home maintenance, not because I explained the importance of upkeep, but because he started paying rent to landlords who expected him to handle minor repairs himself. He learned gratitude, not because I demanded it, but because he finally understood what he'd been taking for granted. The house is gone, but the family is stronger. The money is invested, but the relationship is restored. The silence is broken, but the respect is rebuilt. And if anyone ever asks me whether quiet counts as help, I'll just show them the ledger. You didn't lose me, son. You gave me away, and I finally took myself back.